There is a strong possibility that the United States is preparing for a major assault on Iran in the coming days. That does not mean an attack is certain, because the United States could still back down, but the preparations are clearly taking place. American forces, warships, ammunition, aircraft, and additional troops have been brought into the region, while forces in countries such as Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, the Emirates, and Jordan are also preparing. Some personnel have reportedly moved out of their usual bases and into hotels or other locations because of the threat from Iranian missiles and drones. Iran, meanwhile, is on full alert. The Iranian position has been made very clear. If the country's infrastructure is attacked, the response will be decisive. Iran has warned that it would strike Israeli infrastructure, as well as infrastructure in countries assisting the United States. So the Iranians are not simply waiting for an attack. They are preparing for it every day that passes. They are building more missiles and drones, expanding underground missile bases, strengthening command and control structures, developing new technology, and improving their ability to operate in the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, and the surrounding region. The next stage could therefore be extremely dangerous, and no one can say with certainty how far the United States is prepared to go. I think the recent appointments in Iran are also important because they show a growing confidence in the country's position. Some of the officials whose names were announced had already been carrying out their responsibilities, but their identities had not been publicly disclosed because of security concerns and the possibility of war. Announcing them now suggests that the Iranians feel more confident about protecting their officials. The most significant appointment is Dr. Mohsen Rezaei becoming the chair of the Supreme National Security Council. I see this as a signal that Iran is going to take a more assertive position in dealing with the United States. Rezaei is a heavyweight figure. He was the head of the Revolutionary Guards when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, and he played a major role in building the organization, including its Air Force and Navy. He also served as its longest-serving commander and has held several important positions over the years. The Supreme National Security Council is not concerned only with war or military issues. It deals with social, economic, foreign policy, and security matters. So having someone with Rezaei's experience there can strengthen coordination between the president, parliament, judiciary, armed forces, and other state institutions. We have also seen greater coordination at the highest level of the Iranian government. Senior leaders have been meeting regularly, and the military leadership is becoming more visible. To me, all of this indicates that Iran is preparing for the next stage while trying to normalize life despite the threat of another war. Iran is therefore strengthening its internal coordination, preparing militarily, and taking a harder position at the negotiating table. If the United States chooses confrontation, Iran wants to be prepared politically, militarily, and economically for whatever comes next. We have to understand that Iran's response to any future attack is not something we can predict with certainty. It will depend on the nature and scale of the American and Israeli strikes. During the previous wars, we saw different patterns of attack. There were periods when targets were struck across the country, including schools, hospitals, pharmaceutical facilities, industrial sites, and public infrastructure. In another phase, the focus was more heavily concentrated on targets around the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. But what is important is how Iran's capabilities have developed over time. We saw this progression beginning with True Promise 1. At that stage, Iran was testing Israeli capabilities and forcing Israel and the United States to use large amounts of air defense missiles against Iranian drones and missiles. In True Promise 2, Iran became more effective and continued forcing its opponents to expend their defensive capabilities. Then we saw further changes during the different periods of fighting. Iranian capabilities continued to improve, and during the later fighting, Iran was able to operate more effectively than before. So Iran has been consistently learning and becoming more capable on the battlefield. Its military capabilities are improving, and while the Iranian economy is obviously suffering from inflation and serious difficulties, the armed forces are more prepared than they have ever been. If the United States strikes again, I believe the pain Iran can inflict in response could be enormous. The exact response will depend on what is attacked, but Iran is preparing for the possibility of a much more serious confrontation. We also have to look at the countries that are assisting the United States. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Oman have all provided different forms of support. During the previous wars, their territory was used to support American and Israeli military operations, including the movement and refueling of aircraft. From Iran's perspective, these countries are therefore participating in the conflict. That is particularly important because these countries are extremely vulnerable. They have refineries, petrochemical facilities, oil export infrastructure, and other critical installations. If Iran is attacked and decides that these countries are directly assisting the attack, they could face serious consequences. Iran has made clear that its response would not necessarily be limited to the exact location from which an attack was launched. The same applies to the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. If the conflict expands, it could affect energy supplies and the global economy. The countries that are helping the United States may therefore find themselves directly exposed to the consequences of a wider war. This is why another American attack would be so dangerous. Once the fighting begins, there is no guarantee that it will remain limited. Iran has been preparing for this possibility, and the response will depend on the nature of the attack. But if the United States chooses to escalate, the countries supporting it will have to understand that they may also become part of the battlefield. We also have to look at the countries that are assisting the United States. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Oman have all provided different forms of support. During the previous wars, their territory was used to support American and Israeli military operations, including the movement and refueling of aircraft. From Iran's perspective, these countries are therefore participating in the conflict. That is particularly important because these countries are extremely vulnerable. They have refineries, petrochemical facilities, oil export infrastructure, and other critical installations. If Iran is attacked and decides that these countries are directly assisting the attack, they could face serious consequences. Iran has made clear that its response would not necessarily be limited to the exact location from which an attack was launched. The same applies to the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. If the conflict expands, it could affect energy supplies and the global economy. The countries that are helping the United States may therefore find themselves directly exposed to the consequences of a wider war. This is why another American attack would be so dangerous. Once the fighting begins, there is no guarantee that it will remain limited. Iran has been preparing for this possibility, and the response will depend on the nature of the attack. But if the United States chooses to escalate, the countries supporting it will have to understand that they may also become part of the battlefield. The situation in Yemen is another part of this wider confrontation. Saudi Arabia has continued its campaign against Ansarullah, while Yemen has demonstrated that it can strike Saudi targets and put pressure on the Saudi economy. The Yemeni position is that the pressure on Saudi Arabia is a response to the siege and attacks that Saudi Arabia imposed on Yemen. Yemen has much less to lose than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has refineries, petrochemical plants, oil export facilities, and enormous financial interests that depend on stability. If those facilities are seriously damaged, the consequences for the Saudi economy could be enormous. Yemen, meanwhile, has already endured years of war and believes that it is fighting to end the siege imposed on its people. So when we look at what is happening in Yemen, we should not look only at the attacks against Saudi Arabia. We have to understand them as part of a much longer conflict. Yemen is trying to impose costs on Saudi Arabia in order to force an end to the siege, and despite the enormous resources Saudi Arabia has spent, it has not been able to defeat Ansarullah. And we are seeing now how quickly this can become a wider regional problem. Saudi Arabia has been strengthening its defensive arrangements with regional partners, while attacks connected to Yemen have continued to put pressure on Saudi territory and its energy infrastructure. At the same time, the situation around the Strait of Hormuz remains extremely dangerous. Iran has said that the strait will remain closed until its conditions are met, while the United States continues to insist that the waterway should remain open. So the danger is not simply that Iran and the United States could return to direct fighting. The danger is that several fronts could become connected at the same time. Yemen can put pressure on Saudi Arabia and the Red Sea, Iran can affect the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States has forces throughout the region. Once these fronts begin interacting with one another, it becomes much harder to control the escalation.